Sure, Daniel. I think that where people deal with tax issues, first they have to understand that they're very complicated, and there's such a wealth of legislation out there that changes quite frequently. There's a lot of literature on the matter, a lot of articles that are written about subjects that are of a complicated tax nature, and the average man in the street just doesn't have the ability to absorb that kind of information and assimilate it for himself. So approaching a tax team or tax experts are essential for people to get the right advice. And my feeling has always been that when people look at tax matters, normally they get into some arena of fear, and very much like when they think they've got a medical condition, they rather try and see the thing through, or they panic about it, or they are so concerned that they don't act. And then what happens is they try and resolve the thing themselves, and only when it doesn't go away do they end up going to a specialist to get advice, and then they find out that there's so much pain and anguish they could have avoided, or they've left the thing too late, and of course the problem ends up being more serious than it ought to be. And it's the same with tax, is that people try and sort it out on their own. They go by advice they've received from people who don't really have the skill and experience, and then they end up getting into trouble with the receiver's office because they just are none the wiser and they haven't approached the right people. And that's why it's essential to have a tax team, and more so in business.
Now, how would you go about structuring this tax team?
Well, I think what you have to do is realize that you need considerable expertise, people who are well skilled in the field. In the business environment, you would obviously have people who are involved at the financial level in your business, such as your chief financial officer or your financial director. You would then have the person, if it's someone separate from the one I've just named, who specializes in the tax arena, like a tax manager. You would use that kind of person. Mm-hmm. You would then bring in other experts who have particular expertise in areas such as capital gains tax, PAYE and the like. And then you would have a team of legal specialists who specialize in this arena. And I think with that you have a pretty good balance. And of course it's always good to have an outside team or outside consultants as well who fulfill some of those roles, because they take a more objective approach to the matter.
But surely if you just look at all these people, I mean, people are going to say, wow, this is going to be a whopping bill. I mean, surely one's got to be careful as to how you structure it. How would you keep the costs under control? Because that always seems to be a big issue when you don't even know what risks you're looking at.
Sure.
Although we do say that often those risks are huge, they just haven't been quantified. How do you convince the CFO or the owner of the business to commit funds to compiling this tax team?
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to look at the size of your potential problem. You then have to weigh up whether there's any penalty you may face and interest, and then really it's a commercial decision that you have to make. And if it's like to be of significant proportions, then obviously you must spend the necessary funds and put in the necessary resources to make sure you get the best advice. Because without expert help, you normally find yourself getting further into trouble rather than actually extricating yourself out of it. Obviously, where the problems of a minor nature, you would then approach someone who has the specialist skill who can address your particular need. And I just think you have to be sensitive to that. And my advice to people would be ask how much it's going to cost up front, rather than committing and then complaining about the bill later.
Sure. I mean, often the way to go about these things is to work out a strategy. I mean, one needs to spend some time and effort into trying to uncover what those particular risk areas are, which then need to be investigated. And of course, there's horses for courses. So you wouldn't necessarily have to put together such a huge team from the beginning. You would only really build on it as and when you started uncovering some of the tax risks that you do in fact have. Any further pieces of information or advice that you can give viewers out there, Terry? I mean, it's a huge field, and I mean it's covered in many different subsections in Chapter 2. With case studies. I think you may have some additional bits of insight to share with viewers.
Sure. I think what we've got to realize is that any of us who earn money are subject to tax, and I think that we've got to be wise about it. We've got to realize that it's going to stay with us, and when one has to render their tax returns, when one has to submit information that is required by the tax authorities on an ongoing basis, that they do it correctly, they do it timelessly, to make sure that they are not going to run into a headlong crash with the receiver's office, get the right advice, and then work through the problem, and to be wise in how they manage it from there.
Thank you very much, Terry, for sharing that information with us. And please look out for the LexisNexis book, and those of you who'd like to read more about this topic, it's available for purchase. Until next week, goodbye.